The conference room was packed when Mark deleted my presentation. I stood frozen at the front, watching months of my work vanish from the screen with a single click. 70 people stared at me while my boss laughed and said, "Let me show you how a real professional handles this." He replaced my slides with his version, using my exact words and graphics. My hands shook as I returned to my seat. People avoided my eyes. Some whispered behind their hands. My cheeks burned with humiliation as Mark presented my campaign as his own brilliant idea. He didn't even acknowledge me once during the entire presentation. When it ended, everyone clapped for him while I sat there drowning in shame. My best friend Amy leaned over and whispered 5 words that changed everything. "He stole your campaign, didn't he?" I nodded slowly, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. That's when I realized this wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last unless I did something about it. Something big. 6 months earlier, I had walked into sterling marketing with bright eyes and high hopes. Fresh from university, I was grateful when Mark Coleman hired me as a junior strategist. He seemed charming during my interview, calling me exactly what this team needs. For the first few weeks, everything felt perfect. Mark mentored me personally, teaching me about client relationships and campaign strategies. He praised my creative ideas and told the team I was his secret weapon. I worked late nights developing concepts, and Mark would review them over coffee the next morning. "You're going to go far here," he promised. I believed him completely. Then came my first big pitch for a wellness brand client. I'd spent 3 weeks researching their target audience and developing a social media strategy. The night before the presentation, Mark asked to review my materials one final time. The next morning, he presented my entire pitch to the client without me in the room. When I asked about it later, he smiled and said, "Don't worry, I told them it was a team effort." Over the next 3 months, the pattern became clear. Every campaign I developed somehow became Mark's achievement by the time executives heard about it. He'd ask to polish my presentations, then deliver them himself while I sat in the audience. During team meetings, he'd reference my strategy when describing concepts I'd created alone in my apartment at midnight. When I mentioned this to the senior account manager, he laughed it off. "That's how the industry works. Mark's championing your ideas upstairs. You should be grateful." But I wasn't grateful. I was invisible. So I started documenting everything. I saved every email, every draft with timestamps, every message where I outlined ideas before Mark saw them. I created a private folder on my personal cloud storage with dated files proving my work. I didn't know what I'd do with this evidence yet, but something told me I'd need it eventually. Mark had no idea I was building a case against him. The breaking point came during a client meeting with a major sports brand. Mark introduced me as my assistant who handles the research. The client barely glanced at me. For an hour, Mark presented the campaign strategy I'd developed, making jokes and building rapport while I sat silently taking notes like actual support staff. When the client asked a technical question about audience analytics, Mark fumbled. I tried to help by explaining the data, but he cut me off mid-sentence. "Claire handles the boring number stuff. Let me explain what really matters." The client laughed along with him. I felt something crack inside my chest. After the meeting, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, crying so hard I couldn't see. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Great meeting. You're learning a lot from watching me work." I stared at those words until they blurred. Then I whispered to my empty car, "Never again." That night I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to quit. Quitting meant Mark won, and I'd spent months building campaigns that kept this company profitable. Instead, I decided to outsmart him. I started paying closer attention to office politics, watching how executives interacted and which departments held real power. Mark had enemies. I could see it in how the finance director rolled her eyes during his presentations, how the creative team made jokes about him after meetings. He'd burned people before me, stepped on others to climb higher. I began having casual coffee chats with coworkers from different departments. Nothing obvious, just friendly conversations where people naturally shared frustrations. Slowly, I built quiet alliances with people who'd also been hurt by Mark's ambition. I learned that 3 people had left the company specifically because of him. One had even filed a complaint with HR that disappeared mysteriously. Mark thought he was untouchable because executives loved his results. But those results were my work, and soon everyone would know it. 2 weeks later, I received a LinkedIn message from Julia Torres. She'd worked at Sterling Marketing 5 years ago and somehow heard I was on Mark's team. "Can we grab coffee? I have something important to tell you." We met at a cafe downtown and Julia told me her story. She'd been a rising star at Sterling until Mark became her supervisor. For 2 years, he took credit for her campaigns while sabotaging her reputation behind the scenes. When she finally confronted him with evidence, he convinced HR she was bitter about a failed promotion. She left the company broken and spent years rebuilding her career. "But I learned something valuable," Julia said, stirring her coffee slowly. "You can't fight people like Mark directly. You have to build something they can't steal, something that makes you indispensable." She leaned forward with fierce eyes. "Make them need you more than they fear losing him. Then you have power." Those words planted a seed in my mind that grew into a plan. A plan that would take patience, strategy, and perfect timing. I started volunteering for tasks Mark found boring. Analytics reports, campaign performance tracking, client communication logs. He was happy to dump the administrative work on me while he focused on presentations and executive meetings. What he didn't realize was that I was building a digital paper trail. Every campaign now had my name attached in the system metadata. Every strategy document I created was time-stamped and saved to the company cloud with clear authorship. I routed all project communications through platforms that tracked contributor history. Mark never paid attention to these details. He saw himself as the big-picture visionary who didn't need to worry about documentation. His arrogance became my advantage. I also began subtly improving my relationships with clients during the rare times Mark allowed me in meetings. I followed up with personalized emails, remembered details about their businesses, and sent relevant industry articles. Slowly, clients started reaching out to me directly with questions instead of going through Mark. He never noticed because the work still got done and he still got the credit. But I was becoming the engine that made his machine run. 4 months into my quiet campaign, Mark was promoted to creative director. The announcement came during an all-staff meeting where the CEO praised his innovative leadership and consistent results. Mark gave a modest speech about teamwork while I smiled from my seat in the back. He was drunk on success, more arrogant than ever. He started coming in late, leaving early, taking long lunches while I handled client emergencies and campaign deadlines. But here's what he missed. While Mark enjoyed his promotion, I was becoming the person clients actually trusted. When problems arose, they called me. When questions needed answering, they emailed me. The account coordinator told me privately that 3 clients had specifically requested I remain on their accounts regardless of team changes. Mark thought his promotion meant he'd won. He had no idea he'd just given me exactly what I needed. Responsibility without oversight. I was now running campaigns with minimal interference while he attended executive meetings and networking events. I had access, relationships, and documentation. All I needed was the right moment. The quarterly executive meeting nearly broke me. Mark presented my year-long campaign for a tech startup client as his visionary strategy for the modern market. He spent 40 minutes explaining concepts I'd developed during countless late nights, using phrases I'd written in strategy documents he barely read. The CEO stood up and applauded. The board approved a massive bonus for Mark's exceptional strategic thinking. I watched from my desk through the glass conference room walls, feeling invisible and defeated. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my resignation letter, ready to send it. Then my phone rang. It was Julia. "Don't quit yet," she said firmly. "You're not ready. Make them need you first. Then leave on your terms. She reminded me of her own mistake, leaving too soon before people understood her value. Build something outside they can't touch. Then you'll have real power. I deleted the resignation letter and opened my laptop. If I was going to leave, I'd do it right. Julia and I started something new. Working nights and weekends, we launched Torres & Associates, a boutique marketing consultancy. We specialized in digital strategy for mid-sized companies, the same market Sterling targeted. I used techniques I developed but Mark had never truly understood. He copied my presentations but never grasped the underlying principles. Within 8 weeks, we signed our first client, a sustainable fashion brand frustrated with their current agency. Our second client came through a referral, an organic food company that competed directly with one of Sterling's accounts. I was careful to avoid any conflicts of interest or confidentiality breaches. Everything I used was knowledge I developed independently or was publicly available strategy. Julia handled business development while I led creative strategy. We kept the company completely quiet, registered under Julia's name with no public connection to me. Mark had no idea I was building an empire in the shadows. At Sterling, I remained the dedicated employee, staying late and meeting deadlines. But I was also creating my exit strategy, one client at a time. My documentation became more deliberate. Every campaign file I created included my name and properties, metadata, and version history. I made sure cloud-based documents showed my authorship and timestamp every revision. When Mark asked for materials to review, I'd send him PDFs or presentations, but the original working files stayed in my account with clear creation dates. I also started copying the finance director on budget reports and campaign performance metrics. She appreciated the transparency and began relying on my updates. During casual conversations, I'd mention specific challenges I'd solved or strategies I'd implemented. She listened more carefully than Mark ever did. Other executives started noticing me too. The operations director asked my opinion on workflow efficiency. The senior account manager requested my input on client retention. I wasn't loud about it, just consistently competent and visible. Mark barely noticed because he was too busy enjoying his director title. But I was building relationships with people who had real power, people who would remember my contributions when the time came. 3 months later, Mark received an invitation to speak at the National Marketing Summit, a prestigious industry conference. He was scheduled to present on innovative digital strategies for emerging markets, specifically using the tech startup campaign as his case study. My campaign. During a team meeting, he casually announced his speaking engagement. You should all attend if you can. Try to learn something from watching how I present. He looked directly at me when he said it. People laughed nervously. Amy squeezed my hand under the table. I smiled calmly and said, "Congratulations, Mark. That sounds like an amazing opportunity." Inside, my heart was pounding, because I'd already registered for that conference weeks ago when I saw the speaker list. Julia had connections with the event organizers and helped me secure a press pass through a marketing publication that occasionally published my articles. Mark had no idea I'd be in that audience. More importantly, he didn't know that I'd already submitted the original campaign files to the conference database for attendees to download, complete with my name, timestamps, and detailed documentation showing the development process. The trap was set. The conference hall held 300 people when Mark took the stage. I sat in the middle section with my notebook, recording everything. He looked confident in his expensive suit, working the room with practiced charm. For 20 minutes, he presented my campaign using my exact analysis, my consumer insights, my creative strategy. He even used phrases I'd written verbatim in the original proposal. During the Q&A session, a journalist from Marketing Weekly raised her hand. I downloaded the supporting materials from the conference database. The metadata shows Claire Donovan as the primary author with development dates spanning 6 months. Could you speak about the collaborative process? The room went silent. Mark's face lost color. He stammered something about team efforts and mentorship. But the journalist pressed further, showing her tablet screen to nearby attendees. The file properties indicate Ms. Donovan created every component independently. Were you involved in the development or primarily in presentation? Mark's voice got louder. This is my team's work under my leadership. But cameras were recording. People were whispering. The moderator called time and Mark stormed off stage. I could hear him screaming backstage that someone had sabotaged him. I stayed in my seat, taking careful notes. The journalist caught my eye and nodded slightly. She knew exactly who I was. By Monday morning, Sterling's HR department had launched an internal review. The conference incident had been tweeted, shared, and discussed across industry forums. Several attendees had been Sterling clients who immediately contacted the company with concerns about credit attribution and leadership integrity. Mark tried to get ahead of it by calling an emergency team meeting. He claimed I'd deliberately undermined him by submitting files without permission. Claire has been acting erratically lately, he told HR. I think she's struggling with the pressure. But I had 4 years of documentation. Emails showing my campaign development process. Messages where Mark asked to borrow my materials. Cloud storage files with creation dates and edit histories. Witness statements from co-workers who'd seen me working late on these projects. The HR director, Patricia Vance, called me in for a private meeting. She reviewed my evidence carefully, her expression growing harder as she went through each file. Finally, she looked up and said, "This is quite thorough." I met her eyes steadily. "I learned to protect my work." She nodded slowly. "Mark's promotion is being reconsidered. Your documentation is very helpful." I walked out of that office knowing I was untouchable. Mark didn't give up easily. When the investigation didn't immediately destroy my credibility, he changed tactics. He started spreading rumors during lunch breaks and after-work drinks. I was unstable and ambitious in unhealthy ways. I was trying to take credit for team collaboration. I was obsessed with undermining leadership. Some people believed him, especially those who owed their positions to his influence. I found myself eating lunch alone again, avoided in hallways, excluded from casual conversations. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. But I had something Mark didn't. My side business. Torres and Associates was growing steadily. We'd signed 2 more clients and hired a junior designer. Julia handled most client meetings while I worked remotely, protecting my anonymity. Every week, my escape route became more solid. At Sterling, I kept my head down and did excellent work. I didn't defend myself against the rumors because I didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. My campaign still delivered results. My clients still trusted me. And the executives were starting to see the difference between Mark's presentations and my substance. Then something unexpected happened. Torres and Associates landed a major account, a regional retail chain expanding into e-commerce. They'd interviewed 3 agencies before choosing us. What I didn't know until after they signed was that they'd previously worked with Sterling Marketing. They'd left because, according to their CMO, the director was arrogant and dismissive, but we loved working with someone on his team who really understood our needs. They described that person. It was clearly me. The account was worth 6 figures annually. Julia and I celebrated quietly, knowing this changed everything. Our little side project was becoming a real company. We hired 2 more staff members and rented a small office space. I still went to Sterling every day, still handled my campaigns professionally, still smiled at Mark in meetings. But every night I was building something bigger. Something Mark couldn't touch or steal or take credit for. I was creating my own future and it felt incredible. The CFO at Sterling noticed when the retail chain canceled their contract to work with a smaller, more attentive agency. Mark blamed the account coordinator. He had no idea I was on the other side. The whispers started during my 6th month back after the conference incident. Amy heard it first from someone in finance. The board was considering leadership changes. Mark's campaign performance had declined sharply since the summit scandal. More specifically, the campaigns he ran without my direct involvement were underperforming badly. Clients complained about missed details and poor communication. 2 accounts had already started conversations with competing agencies. The numbers didn't lie, and the executives were finally paying attention. I overheard Mark on a phone call one afternoon. His voice tense and defensive. "I built this department. My track record speaks for itself." But his track record was my work, and now everyone could see the difference. He caught me listening and slammed his office door. The next day he was cold and distant, watching me with suspicious eyes. He knew something was wrong but couldn't figure out what. I remained calm and professional, which seemed to unnerve him more. The not knowing was eating at him, and honestly I enjoyed watching him squirm. Patience was becoming my greatest weapon. The confrontation happened in the break room on a Thursday afternoon. I was making coffee when Mark walked in and closed the door behind him. "You're destroying me," he said quietly. His voice shook with barely controlled anger. "Everything was fine until you started playing games." I turned to face him calmly. "I haven't done anything to you, Mark. I just do my job. You sabotaged me at that conference. You've been turning people against me. You're undermining everything I've built here." His face was red, fists clenched at his sides. I could have yelled back. I could have listed every campaign he'd stolen, every humiliation he'd caused, every time he'd made me invisible. Instead, I just looked at him steadily and said, "You can't steal what you don't understand, Mark. That's your real problem." Then I picked up my coffee and walked out, leaving him standing there in stunned silence. It wasn't dramatic or satisfying in an obvious way. But seeing him realize that I wasn't afraid anymore, that felt like victory. From that day forward, he avoided me completely, which was exactly what I wanted. 2 weeks later, the CEO called me into his office. Ronald Fitzgerald was a shrewd businessman in his 60s who'd built Sterling from a small startup. He got straight to the point. "I've reviewed the documentation from the HR investigation. I've also looked at campaign performance over the past year." He paused, studying me. "You're the engine behind our best work." I waited silently. Mark's promotion was premature. "The board agrees. We'd like to offer you the position of creative director, reporting directly to me. Significant raise, equity options, your own team." It was everything I'd wanted 6 months ago. The validation, the recognition, the power to never be stolen from again. Ronald waited for my answer, clearly expecting immediate acceptance. Instead, I took a slow breath and said, "I appreciate the offer, but I have to decline." His eyebrows shot up. "May I ask why?" "Because I'm resigning. I'm giving 4 weeks' notice to ensure a smooth transition, but I'm leaving Sterling." The shock on his face was almost worth everything by itself. Almost. I slid a formal resignation letter across Ronald's desk. He read it carefully, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding. The letter was professional and courteous, thanking Sterling for the opportunities and experiences. It also mentioned my upcoming feature in Marketing Weekly magazine, where I'd be interviewed about innovative strategies for emerging businesses. And it included a brief mention of Torres and Associates, a new consultancy I'd co-founded that was currently accepting select clients. Ronald looked up at me with something like respect. "You've been planning this." "I've been preparing," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." He leaned back in his chair. "What about Mark? That's your decision to make. I'm just moving forward with my career." I stood to leave and he stopped me. "Claire, I'm sorry we didn't see this sooner. You deserved better." "Yes," I agreed simply. I did. When I left his office, Mark was waiting in the hallway. He'd clearly heard I was meeting with the CEO. His face was pale, desperate. "What did you tell him?" I smiled slightly. "The truth. That's all I've ever needed." His world was ending and mine was just beginning. The next 4 weeks were fascinating to watch. Without my systems and client relationships, Mark's department fell apart rapidly. Campaign deadlines were missed. Client communications broke down. 2 major accounts formally requested to move to different agencies, citing inconsistent service quality and leadership concerns. The board launched a deeper investigation into Mark's tenure as creative director. They discovered a pattern of taking credit for subordinates' work going back 3 years. Former employees were contacted and shared similar stories. The conference scandal had opened a door, and now everything was tumbling through. Mark was stripped of his director title within 2 weeks. He was reassigned to a junior strategist position, reporting to someone who used to report to him. His salary was cut significantly, but he wasn't fired immediately. That would come later, after HR documented enough misconduct to terminate without severance. Watching his slow professional death should have felt satisfying. Instead, I felt mostly indifferent. I was too busy building my future to waste energy on his collapse. Revenge, I learned, wasn't about destroying someone. It was about outgrowing them so completely they became irrelevant. Torres and Associates grew rapidly once I joined full-time. Former co-workers from Sterling who'd been mistreated by Mark reached out, and we hired 3 of them. We built a culture of recognition and respect, where everyone's contributions were acknowledged publicly. Within 6 months, we had 12 clients and were fielding more inquiries than we could handle. The industry noticed. We won a regional award for Best Emerging Agency. Marketing publications wrote features about our collaborative approach and strong results. We were invited to speak at conferences, and this time I presented my own work under my own name. Sterling's CEO reached out about a potential partnership for overflow clients. I considered it carefully and agreed to specific project-based collaboration. Not because I needed Sterling, but because it demonstrated our growth and professionalism. Ronald and I developed a respectful working relationship. He'd learned his lesson about recognizing talent. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Mark's theft had ultimately forced me to build something better than I could have achieved at Sterling. His worst behavior had been my greatest catalyst. 8 months after I left Sterling, I received an email that made me pause. The sender was Mark Coleman. The subject line read, "Professional Inquiry." I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won. His message was careful and formal, stripped of his usual arrogance. He was now freelancing after pursuing other opportunities, and wondered if Torres and Associates might have any contract positions available. He emphasized his extensive industry experience and proven track record. I read it twice, trying to understand what he expected. Did he really think I'd hire him after everything? Or was he so desperate that he had no other options? I showed the email to Julia. She laughed until she cried. "Are you going to respond?" she asked. I thought about it carefully. I could ignore him. I could write something cutting. Or I could respond with simple truth. I typed one line. "I don't think you'd fit our company culture." Then I hit send and closed my laptop. It was the last communication we ever had. Sometimes the best response isn't elaborate revenge. It's just moving forward without them. A year after the conference incident, Torres and Associates won the Regional Marketing Excellence Award. The ceremony was held in a hotel ballroom with over 400 industry professionals. When they announced our name, Julia and I walked to the stage together. I looked out at the audience and saw familiar faces. Clients we'd helped succeed. Former Sterling colleagues who'd found better opportunities. The journalist from Marketing Weekly who'd asked that crucial question at the conference. During my acceptance speech, I talked about the importance of recognizing every team member's contributions, about building cultures where people feel valued and acknowledged, about how the best work comes from environments of trust and respect. "I want to thank every boss who underestimated me," I said, and people laughed knowingly. "Because you taught me to value myself even when others wouldn't." The applause was genuine and warm. Afterward, several young professionals approached me asking for advice about handling difficult work situations. I talked with each person carefully, sharing what I'd learned. Revenge wasn't really about hurting someone who hurt you. It was about refusing to let their treatment define your worth. 6 months later, I had a meeting at Sterling's offices to discuss a joint campaign proposal. As I walked through the lobby, I saw Mark sitting in the waiting area. He was there for an interview, wearing a suit that had seen better days, clutching a portfolio nervously. Our eyes met across the marble floor. He looked older, tired, defeated. For a moment, I remembered the confident boss who'd humiliated me in that conference room, who'd stolen my work and made me feel worthless. But that person seemed like a stranger now. I'd moved so far beyond that version of myself. I didn't feel anger or satisfaction. Felt nothing. He was simply someone I used to know, someone who'd accidentally taught me the most valuable lesson of my career, that my worth wasn't determined by who recognized it, but by my refusal to accept being diminished. I walked past him without speaking, rode the elevator to the executive floor, and focused on my future. He'd taught me humiliation, but I'd taught him something more important. I taught him consequences. Not through destruction or revenge, but through success he could never touch or claim or steal. And that, I'd learned, was the most powerful response of all.